Hello, everyone, and welcome back to MC 310. In week 6, we're going to be talking about basic layout and design. Up to this point, we've talked about larger concepts such as branding, color theory, text, hierarchy, and things of that nature. Now we're going to be combining all of the individual elements to talk about how it works on the page together. And so let's talk first about composition. When we're talking about composition within design and layout, what we mean is how all of the elements fit together to make a complete design. So while individual elements may look good or may work by themselves, when combined, sometimes they don't exactly fit. And so composition is really the process of designing something so the entire design looks appropriate and works together. One of the main ways that you can effectively compose a design is through the use of hierarchy. Now, we talked about hierarchy a little bit when we talked about text and fonts, but in hierarchy of the overall design, what we're really talking about is ranking the importance of individual elements so that they flow together and create order and organization so that your viewer can better understand the message your design is trying to send. Hierarchy is really about balancing because if you have too many things that are screaming for attention on a design, it forces your viewer to really think more about where their eyes should be looking. They get confused. A lot of information will get lost this way. And so through the use of hierarchy, you're really help guiding your audience through your messaging and your design. One way to achieve hierarchy is through rank text, and this is by picking out pieces of text that are most important. On a business card, for instance, the name might be the most important thing that you want to communicate to your audience. And by ranking the text into different sizes, different colors, different fonts, even. What you're telling your audience is what is the most important piece of information on the page. Here you can see in the before and after that the designer has chosen to rank the name as the most important, and then the contact information follows in what's called a second rank order. Most designs will naturally have three ranks in terms of text, such as a headline, a subhead, and then additional information. Even when you're thinking about a basic online article, you have your headline and then you have your subheads, that are bolded and a little bit larger in font. And then you have the body of your article. And so this tells your reader where the eye should look and what are the most important elements. That's the main idea behind rank text. And so in order to rank text, just pick out the most important part. Make that the most visible, either through the size of the font or typeface itself, and other means such as bolding and other text elements. Another way to achieve hierarchy is through the balancing of size and scale. Size, as your textbook refers to, is the actual measurement of an object. And we can talk about size in terms of text size or element size. And so the size of a font, for instance, could be 12 points, but it won't affect its scale unless it has other elements on the page. So scale is really about how the sizes compare to one another. And so by playing with scale, you can really tell someone what the size and even the importance of an object is, because the size being larger will tell your audience, hey, this is the more important thing. So in our example on the left, we have the same size for both the diver and the whale, but this is not drawn to scale. It makes the diver look more important and it makes the whale look farther away because we know that whales should be larger than humans. And so by changing the size and making them equal, it makes the whale look farther away and therefore less important. When you change the scale of the whale to be much larger than the diver, then the whale becomes the most important object And this feels more natural to your design because we naturally know that whales are larger than humans. So play around with size and scale of different fonts and different elements in order to rank the importance and keep order on your design. Another use of size and scale, particularly in text, is the use of a drop cap. A drop cap makes one letter, usually the first one within a paragraph, larger in order to draw attention and bring style to the design. You can see on the left a very artistic drop cap that takes up a paragraph and even into the second paragraph. This is very stylized, but it draws the attention to the first capital letter of the sentence. Please note though, with a drop cap, you want to ensure that the spacing between the lines of text remain equal, and you don't want to push and leave too much white space around the drop cap because it's just not as effective, as you can see in the before and after of the M. One other way that you can play with hierarchy is through the use of uppercase. Now, remember, when we write in uppercase in the typical body of a text, it indicates that you are yelling. But with a design, sometimes the use of all caps allows something to stand out and seem more important on the page. Here in this advertisement, you see the word tease is all caps, which draws your attention to T, which is the product. And that is why the designer has chosen to draw the I to the product. You may also notice that at the top, their logo, as well as the subheads across the menu, are also in all caps. This allows these to seem a little bit more important. But again, through scale, we see that the perfect tease to keep you warm is larger than those. And so your eye is immediately drawn to the call out as opposed to the menus, but the menus still remain important because it's what your eye goes to after you see that original call out. So playing with uppercase can be useful, but keep in mind it shouldn't be used for long sentences or long words because it can tire your eyes to read uppercase too much. Weight is another way that we can play with hierarchy. Things that have larger weights will draw the eye in more. Here, cracking has a large weight, meaning it is thicker than any of the other text surrounding it. Therefore, it draws the eye in. Other ways to create weight are to use solid elements as opposed to those that are just outlined, or to draw thicker lines on some areas than others. And so weight can create hierarchy and rank as well. Proximity is another way to utilize hierarchy and create better composition. So proximity just means that something is close, and when things are close to one another, we naturally assume that they go together. And so here on the left, we have a man who is standing by himself and two women on the right. I'm going to assume as the viewer that we are meant to have two separate groups. But if you were to be taking a group photo for your company or an advertisement, this shows that there's division within these elements, and therefore I'm going to assume that your team is divided. That's not a great look if you're trying to present yourself as a cohesive unit. So instead, you can use proximity to bring everyone together and show how these things work in their groups. And so this is another way to create hierarchy and order by grouping things by proximity, placing them closer to one another. Grouping is very similar to proximity in the sense that you create blocks that allow you to rank and order information. In group one, we see larger font size. We see different fonts that are drawing the eye in a little bit more to the name and title, the group one, which is the most important in this instance. Group 2 is all of the contact information. It is grouped together by placing that bit of information close to one another. They don't have much space between them, where group 3 is blocked off by the two lines on the left and right of the website, which allows it to stand out and be different. You'll notice that the type is also different in each group, allowing there to be different groupings that draw the eye naturally around the page. So grouping allows you to place similar bits of information close to one another so that you can read them in particular organizational styles. Position is another important aspect to think about because position can tell the viewer where things are meant to go in space and reality. And I don't necessarily mean space as in outer space, as our example is, but just space around the page. So here on the left, we have the position where, because of the astronaut being next to the moon-like object, it makes it seem like that he or she is very close to the moon. In fact, it's almost like they're on top of it. But the position feels odd to the viewer because there doesn't seem to be much space around them. There's nothing really drawing your eye to the individual. And in fact, my eye, because it is larger, is drawn to the moon and not the actual astronaut. On the right, due to positioning, that is changed. We have the astronaut is positioned closer, larger in scale, and then the moon becomes something that the eye is drawn down towards. And so we are able, through positioning, to change the hierarchy and focus of the design to the astronaut as opposed to the moon. In terms of rules, what I mean here is not rules of design or things you need to follow. It's actually what we call lines on the page. And so rules are different lines that allow the eye to break up bits of information. And so you may remember from our font lesson that I said, don't use the underline feature when you are using font. Instead, we need to be using rules or lines that allow breakup naturally within hierarchy. So here you can see that bits of information are broken apart by the rules around them. And this allows there to be buckets of information that are drawn. So rules, as well as different boxed elements, can be very helpful. Lines, whether they are actually drawn or it's the natural movement of the visual, also help create hierarchy. Here, the lines of the mountain that are pointing down towards the center, as well as the lines on the bottom of the image that are pointing up, allow us to focus in on the two individuals right here in the center. And so all of the lines of the object are pointing to where we want the eye to go. So whether you're doing this through visual lines, or maybe you're actually drawing lines that allow the eye to go to a certain place, lines can be important in creating hierarchy and order because they direct the eye where they need to be looking at. Color is also very important in hierarchy, particularly when you're using high contrast colors. Like we talked about in color theory, when there is large contrast, not only does it help the colors to work together, but it also makes the information that is in that contrast color stand out. And so your eye is drawn to 1924, 1949, 1980, and 2007. So you're going to want to have some really important information around those dates and reasoning as to why you use those colors. Also, you'll note that because of the large contrast between black and white and the larger weight of some of these fonts, such as 1982 having a pretty heavy weight to the typeface, it allows the eye to be drawn differently to each of the numbers. We also have a background color, which is black, being used for 1989 to set up a contrast with white text. So even if you're using a black and white design, really intentionally using color, even within black and white, can help create hierarchy and order to your design to help show your viewer where they need to be looking. Now, color coding is very important for digital and mobile design. And the reason is that we naturally assume that things that are in similar colors are going to have similar functions. So you'll notice that anytime that they have a box that goes to an order page, that box is black with white text that allows it to stand out and be contrasted. But it also helps create organization by showing the viewer where the checkout box is on every page. And so that should be used on every page of the website to really help organize the thought. And you'll notice that for other types of links, and in this instance, it's saying where the contact information page is, you'll notice that they don't use the same kind of color, because then that would confuse the viewer and not tell it organizationally what that information box contains. And so you can get a very in-depth in terms of color coding. In fact, on the part 2 of color theory, I showed you how someone in UX and UI, user experience design, uses color for that exact purpose. Contrast, as we've talked about before, also creates hierarchy and showing what the eye should be drawn to. And contrary to popular thought, it's not necessarily bright colors that will naturally draw the eye, but instead it's whatever contrasts the most. So here it's actually the panther that sticks out the most because it is black compared to all the different colors. But then you'll notice that the Mama and NYE debut show tend to stand out more than even the background up top, because they are contrasted so sharply against a dark black background. And so by creating this contrast, you're really allowing the viewer to understand what the most important elements of your design are. Repetition is another way to create hierarchy, because it allows you to create order. And so even though the placement of the numbers changes, so I only have one number up top, I have 2 numbers on this line diagonal, then 4, 5, 6, 3 numbers on that line. So there's not a true order to the information, but by repeating a number through the design, it tells me where my eye needs to go across the page. So I am directing the reader to know where they need to look in each place. You could also achieve repetition through boxing information in similar colors, creating bullet points, anything that allows a repeated object or type of object to be used so that you understand the flow of the information would be considered repetition. So now that we understand some of the basic ways to create hierarchy, I want you to watch video 2, which will explain different ways of thinking about layout and some of the most used techniques within layout and design. Then you're going to be doing your first full layout of a project using Canva on your discussion board. And then since this is our last week prior to midterm, I also have a midterm review for you to be working on prior to your midterm exam date. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in video 2. I'll see you then.